This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London. All of our podcasts are available from our website, www.sas.ac.uk.
Well, good evening, everybody. It's nice to see you here today. What I think is our fourth in the ISA World Land Trust Biodiversity Conservation in Latin America seminar series. It's a great pleasure to have with us tonight Guillermo, who is the president of Fundación Patagonia, and he's here tonight to talk to us about biodiversity conservation in Estancia La Esperanza in Patagonia. So, Guillermo, I know you've got a busy evening, so I'm going to hand straight over to you.
Thank you. Right. Well, good evening. Thank you for having me here and for giving me the opportunity to talk about a place where I was born and grew up and live and am passionate about, which is Patagonia. I actually wear two hats. For one, my name is also Graham Harris, not just Guillermo. Guillermo was the closest we could get to in Argentina when I was born, and my parents did. And I work for the Wildlife Conservation Society, which is the New York-based Bronx Zoo, which has many conservation projects in different parts of the world. And I'm also the president of Fundación Patagonia. This is another hat that I was wearing, which is a blind, and I was using it to walk in to photograph tern colonies. So I'm going to talk about Patagonia. Patagonia is not a country. It's a region in South America that covers the southern part of Argentina and Chile. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what is it that makes Patagonia so special, or one of the things that makes Patagonia so special. And 20 years ago, last November, two colleagues and I, two researchers, and we got into a small aeroplane, a single-engine Cessna 182, high wing, and we flew 3,000 kilometers down the coast of Patagonia. It was about 50 hours of flying. It took about 2 weeks because of the winds that there are, the notorious winds in Patagonia. And our purpose was to photograph every single colony of birds and mammals that we saw. It meant whenever we saw a colony, we'd get the pilot to fly around the colony and which would allow me to take some photographs. This is the plane we used, and the pilot was a crop duster who was used to flying very low over crops, and we spent most of our time trying to say higher, because he was trying to go to this is the plane. And what we did was we flew from Bahia Blanca, which is here, all the way down the coast as far as the Strait of Magellan. Here, that's 500 kilometers there, so it's about 3,000 kilometers. There were times when we were stuck because of the weather, but we managed to actually photograph what we saw. And what we found that most of the coast actually is empty. There's nothing there. It's like this. Just an empty cliff or an empty beach. But every so often you get masses of wildlife. Just suddenly it's just there. Just a huge colony, in this case, of Magellanic penguins. Magellanic penguins are the most common seabird on the coast of southern Argentina. They're found, they breed all the way down from most of the area where we flew, and up the coast of Chile. And in our southern winter, April, they migrate up as far as southern Brazil. So between April and September, the penguins are gone from Patagonia. So they depend heavily on the ocean. This is what penguins do. They feed out in the southwest Atlantic and southern Pacific. They come ashore and they dig burrows and they make their nests underneath bushes because it's hot. One thinks of penguins, you think of Antarctica, you think of cold, but in point of fact, Magellanic penguins suffer because of heat. And they rear their young in, usually it's 2 chicks, not 4. There must be a few hangers on. And this is the sort of colony you get. This is in an area called Cabo dos Bahías. And it's just spectacular. Just hundreds of thousands of penguins in a small area. The largest of all is Fundación, which is this place. And this is the beach of Fundación in round about now, this time of year. Penguins lining the shores all the way down as far as you can see, all the way down, possibly 4 or 5 kilometers down, and just lining the beaches. Another picture the same. And penguins, of course, are very attractive to us humans because they just do such human things. In this case, I imagine they're saying, "What shall we give George for his birthday?" or some such. And that is what makes penguins so attractive to people. One of the reasons why people love penguins. So what has happened to penguins over the years? Well, we don't know. We don't have records that go back very far. The earliest records, people visited Patagonia, the coast of Patagonia in the late 1800s. Those are the earliest records we have. And some of the colonies had, where now there are huge colonies. Fundación has the largest colony of all, over 200,000 pairs of Magellanic penguins. In 100 years ago, apparently there were none at all. We don't know why, but anyway, they grew, the population expanded rapidly, and so here we have Fundación. There were none. They may have been hunted, we don't know. And in the 1970s, we had over 200,000. Then they sort of dropped down to about 200,000 now. The total population of Magellanic penguins is about 1,600,000. It's, as I say, the most abundant seabird on the coast of Patagonia. We also saw, as we flew along the coast, we saw colonies of sea lions, such as this one. These are South American sea lions, and so what you have is colonies, that's a male, a female. About 50 colonies of South American sea lions all the way down the coast. The largest actually is in Uruguay, has many sea lions and fur seals, and also the coast of Peru. But on the coast of Patagonia we have about 100,000. And this is the sort of thing you get, just wonderful spectacles with a sea lion colony. Sea lions were hunted heavily up until the 1950s on the coast of Argentina. We estimate that the numbers must have been certainly 2 or 3 times what they are now. They're slowly climbing back. We really don't know what they were, but they're coming back up. What they did, of course, was they would just surround these colonies and just club the animals. And what they were doing is using the animals for oil and for pelts. We also saw elephant seal colonies. These are southern elephant seals. These are 2 males here fighting, a female and a pup. This would have been in the month of September. This photograph's from the month of September. And what elephant seals breed on the coast of Patagonia, the only colony outside Antarctica of southern elephant seals is actually on Peninsula Valdez on the coast of Patagonia, which is actually very close to the area where I'm going to talk about in a moment. So this is what you get. This is on the outer coast of Peninsula Valdez. You can see elephant seals there and all the way down. And so what you have, this will be in the middle of the breeding season, a pup, and you'll have 1 male. Somewhere in this group there'll be a male, and he's the beach master. He's defending his big harem of ladies. They can have as many as, usually it's about 30 or 40 females to a male. The largest number is something like 150 to one male. Usually you have a lot of males all the way around, and in fact a lot of those males also manage to mate with the females. But it's a spectacular sight. Southern elephant seals are found throughout the southern hemisphere, southern hemisphere I'd say, because they're pretty close to Antarctica. They're mostly in islands, as I say, and this is the only colony on a continent outside Antarctica. So if you want to see southern elephant seals, you get an aeroplane, you go to Buenos Aires, fly 2 hours to Trelew, and you'll see southern elephant seals. We also have southern right whales. Southern right whales, there's a mother and a calf. They breed in the area around Peninsula Valdez. And so if you go any time between the months of June and late November, December, this is a very common sight. Southern elephant seals, many of them, with their calves around Peninsula Valdez. There's one area that we actually have a small observatory, and at a place called Punta Flecha, which is just outside the town where I live, which is Puerto Madryn, about 20 minutes away. And if you stand on this platform and look out here in the month of August, you can count as many as 150 whales or 200 whales in this area here. So between that point and sort of all the way around, using a pair of binoculars. So these are whales here. They come very, very close to shore. There's another whale over there. Mothers tend to stay in 5 meters of water, and so it's again a spectacular sight. Usually on a weekend, you have people lining the beaches here just watching whales, sitting there quietly watching the whales. So what happened to right whales? Southern right whales, we estimate the original population was about 100,000 before they began hunting them. Obviously, right whales were called the right whale because they were the right whale to kill, and the right whale to kill because it's a very slow, large whale. It's not like the blue whale, which takes a great big mouthful of krill and then it sort of lets the water out through its baleen and it swallows the krill. The southern right whale is a harvester, so it goes along with its mouth open, and the water comes in through the front of the mouth and then out through the sides. So it just goes along with its mouth open, harvesting, krill, small invertebrates it feeds on. The right whale to kill. It also had very long baleen, about 2 meters long. So, and baleen was made for corsets for ladies and watch springs and things like that. So it was almost driven to extinction. Round about 80 years ago, right whales, the hunting of right whales was forbidden by the International Whaling Commission. At that time it was just set up to manage the hunting of whales, and they're slowly coming back. In fact, around where I live, which is southern Patagonia, the whales are coming back very well. They're coming back quite fast, at a rate of about 7% per annum, which means that the population doubles every 10 years. So they're distributed in the southern hemisphere. These are southern right whales, northern right whales here, and well, there were actually northern right whales here around the British Isles, and they were probably driven extinct 500 years ago or more. We also saw big colonies of cormorants. These are imperial cormorants. A very pretty cormorant with these bright blue eyes. A really spectacular bird, and each, when they nest, they build these little sort of built-up nests, each one a sort of beak distance from the next. And so that if you get a large number of cormorants nesting together, they will form these colonies. And the largest of all is this one, which is Estancia La Esperanza on the coast of Patagonia, where we have about 6,000 cormorants. And cormorants also, well, nest together with other animals. In this case, actually, these, you can't see them very well, but these are fur seals and sea lions, all the way around here, these little dots here, and imperial cormorants. So we also saw these mixes of wildlife as we flew. We saw, well, rockhopper penguins. They're not very common on the coast of Patagonia. There are a few. Giant petrels, these big, ugly birds, that are these scavengers of the coast. Terns, two species of terns here, Royal and Cayenne tern. And another species of cormorant, the red-legged cormorant. Red-legged because, as you can see, it's got bright red legs. Also a very pretty cormorant, but quite rare, actually. There are only about, the total population of red-legged cormorants is about 4,000 animals in Argentina and Chile, and that's it. In Chile, actually, they're still hunting eggs of red-legged cormorants. Very pretty bird. And strangely, parrots on the coast, facing the ocean. And you imagine parrots, you think of forest, jungle, or whatever. You know, these nest, burrowing parrots, they dig burrows into the cliffs. And it's a very pretty parrot, very noisy parrot. And there's one area in Patagonia along the northern shore where we have the largest colony of parrots of any species in the world. The burrowing parrot. There are 30,000 nests in 15 kilometers of shoreline. And it's spectacular. So if you go there in November, between November and January, the cliffs explode with parrots. And you walk up to it and there's parrots everywhere. Strangely, the people in that area don't care. This is actually right below the colony. And as far as all these people is concerned, parrots are a nuisance. They're not protected. There's no protected area for parrots. Parrots, they nest in the cliff, but then they feed in the inland amongst the monte bushes. And as far as most people are concerned, they're a nuisance. They're noisy. They wake you up when you want to have a siesta in the afternoon. And the farmers don't like them because they say they eat their crops. But as a spectacle, as a wildlife spectacle, it is absolutely unique. We also saw, amongst other terrestrial animals, guanacos. These are our version of the camel. As you know, there are 4 different camelids in South America: the guanaco, the llama, the vicuña, and the alpaca. This is the most widespread of all. The guanaco, which is found anywhere from Peru right the way down to Tierra del Fuego. The largest populations are found in Patagonia, and it is an icon. It's the largest herbivore we have, and well, this is taken on Peninsula Valdez on the coast. As I say, the guanaco distribution is very large, but the total population has been declining, and this is the cause. Sheep were introduced in Patagonia for wool, production of wool, in the late 1800s, and the population of sheep reached about 50 million about 30, 40 years ago. Which is what we estimate the original population of guanacos was, something between 30 and 50 million. It was one of the biggest, the largest population of ungulates in the world. But sheep were introduced, and sheep graze the Patagonian steppe. They turn it into a desert. They produce erosion, and it's not very sustainable. So we estimate, as I say, originally probably about 30 million in Guanacos. They're down to about, less than 500,000 now. They're down, way down, because they compete, according to the farmers, with sheep. Problems that we have on the coast, pollution. There are two big oil producing areas on the coast of Patagonia, and the oil is transported by ship from these two areas. One is sort of halfway down the coast of Patagonia, if you can imagine it, and the other one's right down close to Tierra del Fuego, near the mouth of the Strait of Magellan. And spills are very common. Spills of oil, they were incredibly common up until the 1990s. And this was a very common sight. It was a tragic sight. What you'd see was a tanker, and very often going very close to these colonies of penguins. And we would see dead and dying penguins everywhere. It was very common. On some of the wildlife reserves, the wardens wouldn't know what to do with them, whether they should pile up these dead birds or burn them or remove them. And what it was is the tankers were cleaning out their tanks as they were, and their ballast tanks primarily, filling their oil tanks with water as they went south to collect oil, and then they would just empty that water, that dirty water, out into the sea as they were approaching to load up with another load of oil. So we've managed to draw attention to the problem, and actually it's got much better. We used to estimate that 41,000 Magellanic penguins were dying every year, on average, as a result of oil, up until the 90s. We shamed the oil industry into cleaning up its act. Now they have separate ballast tanks. They have to. We've got them to move their shipping lanes 30 miles from any colony, and we get far fewer oil birds. We still get oil birds, about 2,000 a year, we estimate. Most of them actually, as the birds move to Brazil in winter, they're going past these big port areas of Bahia Blanca and Buenos Aires and Montevideo and southern Brazil, and they're getting oil there. So it's still a problem. Fishing, commercial fishing, is also a problem. It's not sustainable. Some of the big fishing off this coast, the main target fish is hake, and hake is declining rapidly. And the fishing boats are probably going to start looking for other things, and one of the things they might look for is anchovy. Penguins eat anchovy. So the fear is that the fishing will eventually begin competing directly with seabirds and mammals. This is a squid fishing boat, and this is a photograph taken at night of South America. So these are the lights of the big cities. There's Rio de Janeiro, that'll be Sao Paulo there, I guess. Actually, no, that's Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro. Buenos Aires there, Santiago. My little town where I live in Porto Valle is that one there. These lights here are produced by fishing boats. They're producing more lights than the lights of cities. And what they do, there are these boats here, and they've got big powerful lights all the way along each side, and these lights shine down into the water, and then they have lines that hang down over the side with sharp sort of weights with spikes on them, and they go up and down like this, and the squid hide in the shadow of the boat, which is produced by these lights, and they dart out and try and catch what they think is prey, which is in fact these lines with the traps on them. And so they're caught and hauled on board. So a huge fishing for squid. This bycatch is a problem. This is a photograph of a ship that's fishing for shrimp. And most of the catch, as you can see, is anything but shrimp. Skates and fish, all that is discarded. And this fishery, when it reaches about 50%, is discarded. At that point do they close the fishery, but not before, because shrimp is very valuable. And so this is probably one of the most perverse forms of fishing that takes place. Tourism is another thing that is also a challenge. How do you manage numbers of people in wildlife colonies where the birds are going to breed? Some of these areas, such as Punta Tombo, get about 120,000 visitors a year. It's become one of these tourist destinations for cruise ships. So they land the ship, well, they don't land the ship, they dock in Puerto Madryn, offload everybody, they take them off to Punta Tombo in the morning, and in the evening they bring them all back and load them all up, and off they go. So you can get as many as 4,000 people in a penguin colony. Managing them in such a way they don't affect the penguins is a challenge. And it's going to become more so. Some of these colonies are just getting more and more visitors. And then there are some areas where people just go and they disturb wildlife. In this case, a group of people disturbing an elephant seal. We've even had pumas in some areas taking penguins. This is a photograph in an area in southern Patagonia, and there's an interesting problem here. Sheep farmers, when they brought their sheep down, they got rid of the predators. They hunted pumas, and they brought the numbers of puma way down. It's probable that that is the reason why there were very few penguin colonies on the coast, because the predators are there. Take the predators away, and the penguins began arriving back at their colonies. This is actually in a protected area, a new national park, where the sheep were removed. It used to be a privately owned sheep ranch. Now there are no more sheep, and the pumas are protected, and the pumas are coming back and they're taking sheep. It's becoming a bit of a management problem. So, just let me get to protected areas, because the whole purpose of this is to try and protect these big colonies of marine birds and mammals. There are 43 protected areas on the coast of Argentina. About 36 of them are in Patagonia. And just to give you an idea of how many people live here, it's actually very sparsely populated. There aren't a lot of people. In Patagonia, in other words, from about here down to here, there are about 1 million people living there. And I think I read the other day that 98% of all vertebrates, the vertebrate biomass in the world is either humans or domestic animals, which means that 2% are wild vertebrates, wild animals. That's sobering. And so when you get a place where there are few people, it becomes valuable. Conservation is about buying time, really, because things are changing very rapidly, and we're going to end up with sort of small areas where we can try to protect species. In Patagonia, there is a chance. And one of these areas is Esperanza, which is sort of the reason why I'm here at the invitation of the World Land Trust. This is a private wildlife reserve on the coast of Patagonia. In a very sort of, well, it's part of the desert where it meets the sea. It's a fairly large protected area. It's 6,000 hectares. It was purchased. The price of land, well, it varies, but 6,000 hectares, you can actually buy it for, you could buy it for about $300,000, 200,000 pounds. 12 kilometers of shoreline, and relatively close to the town where I live. Let's see, so I live in Puerto Madryn, which is here, and this is about 75 kilometers north, and it has a section of coast. As you can see, the farm buildings are very close, sort of on the beach. And it's very close to Peninsula Valdez. Let me just go back here a second. This is Peninsula Valdez. It's a sort of hammer-shaped peninsula that's about 70 kilometers by about 40. And it's where I took most of the photographs that you saw of elephant seals and right whales and so on, Magellanic penguins. It's a particularly valuable area. It was declared World Heritage Site by UNESCO in 1999. And so this farm is located in the buffer zone of the protected area. Interestingly, the land itself on Peninsula Valdez is private owned mostly, and it's a sheep farm. So it's not a park, and it's not a reserve or provincial reserve, except for just the coastline. Well, the property, as I say, was purchased by World Land Trust by with help from Mr. Avila, and it was declared formally a private wildlife refuge of the province of Chubut in 2003. FPN, Fundación Patagonia Natural, is the little NGO that I'm the head of in Puerto Madryn, and it runs the property. We own 42% of the shares, 48 belong to World Land Trust. The climate is arid. It's a desert, and in summer, now this time of year, temperatures during the day can go up to about 30 degrees. At night, it'll always cool down to about 15, 16, sometimes as much as 20. Annual rainfall about 10 inches, 250 millimeters. So it's very dry. Humidity is always very, very down. Because, as you know, the Andes block, the prevailing winds just drop their moisture on the Chilean side of the Andes, and they flow over the Patagonian steppes, and they're very, very dry. So all of Patagonia is basically covered with short scrub and grassland. This is a sort of typical image. This would be about this sort of height. Thorn bush, and these are some of the species that you find. Some of them are endemic. It's never really been cleared or sort of used for agriculture. And the only thing that we have in that area is fires every now and then. The big problem, though, of course, is sheep. As for birds and mammals, well, we have 81 species of birds on Esperanza, most of them are land birds, but we also see seabirds and shorebirds, albatrosses out at sea. Especially on windy days, you get black-browed albatrosses coming flying by, which is always very special. Land mammals, guanacos, are the most common species, and one of the main reasons why Esperanza is a protected area, why we actually went into this. When the land was purchased, there were about 100 guanacos. Now there are about 800, which is about the maximum that Esperanza can actually carry. They remain on the property all year round. They don't have very large home ranges. And the only non-native introduced species in any number is the European hare. Marine mammals, I mentioned right whales. We get right whales swimming along the shore. The most common, we see dolphins. The most common marine mammal are South American sea lions. We have a small colony on the property. And then, obviously, we have intertidal interesting things. Fossils. Patagonia was repeatedly inundated by the sea in the past, during the tertiary period, going up and down with successive glaciations and in more recent times, and as the Andes rose in the west. So the hills are filled with marine fossils. Big oysters, which are about this size. And I've often walked through those hills looking for a fossil pearl. I mean, you know, if you've got an oyster this size, I mean, you know, the pearls that you should get are pretty big. I did actually find something once. It sort of stuck to an oyster, but I didn't, that's as far as my search for valuable oyster pearls went. The shoreline is made out of pebbles, rounded, polished pebbles, which come from the Andes. And the big question is, how on earth did they get there? Because the rest is this sort of material. It's sort of sandstone, and then you've got these pebble beaches everywhere. Probably glaciers and rivers and so on is what produced it. The Welche gravel. The past cultures in that area, the indigenous people or the Welche Indians, these are virtually they're non-existent. They've been sort of incorporated in with the immigrants, mainly as you know, Spanish and Italian immigrants in Argentina. But there are few remains of these cultures. Mostly it's these big middens where they lived and they discarded their the things, the shells and some of the things they ate. So Esperanza does have several programs. We have a conservation program which we use to try and protect the habitats and wildlife, research programs on the ecosystem, training, and a volunteer program. And I'm going to talk just very briefly about the volunteer program. In 2008, we began what has become a fairly active program to invite people to volunteer, give up their time for different activities on Esperanza. In last year, 2011, we had a number of volunteers that spent anything, in some cases up to 6 months on the property. And we also had a group of adolescents from this school in Cheltenham. And some of the things that people do when they volunteer their time, they get involved with monitoring different species. Mainly it's guanacos, puma. We monitor the sea lion colony, see how many sea lions there are and what's happening to them, how many pups are born and things like that. And then of course regular monitoring of wildlife, other species. They take care of the different domestic animals that we have there, and obviously the tasks, the daily tasks that you can imagine are involved with a wildlife reserve, such as signs and roads and paths and trails and so on. The goals of Esperanza, what we're trying to do is, well, we want to make sure we can sustain it. We want it to be an effective protected area, so we want to actually have as little impact as possible. We want to be able to use it to train people and to rehabilitate wildlife. And the challenge here is how do you make Esperanza sustainable? And this is actually a problem that not just private reserves worry about, it's governments as well. How do you actually maintain protected areas? One of the things is to actually acquire the protected area, designate it, and the other thing is to actually make it work over time. And it's by far the most expensive thing of all. These are the objectives of Esperanza: to preserve the wildlife of the steppe, the habitats of the steppe, the coastal wildlife, and to sustain it as a protected area. As I said, it's about 7,000 hectares. It is in fact the largest protected area on the coast of Patagonia, or it was up until a few years ago when there was a national park was created. because all of the land is private and all of it was managed as for sheep farming. So that was one of the reasons why we purchased the property and got in and began trying to protect it. I don't expect you to look at the numbers here, but I just thought it'd be interesting to go through the thought process of why and how do you actually make something like this sustain itself. Originally we began sheep farming. It was a sheep farm, so we thought, well, let's bring down the number of sheep and we'll make it sustainable. Well, you can't. Sheep, the value of wool is about 2 pounds a kilo, and a sheep will produce, should we say, 5 kilos. That's so 2 by 5 is 10 pounds a sheep. And we had 1,200 sheep there, so that's what, 12,000 pounds a year, which is not very much. And we managed to, you could sell a few lambs and things like that, but you wouldn't make more than about 20,000 pounds. Running the property, the minimum running cost is about $60,000, 40,000 pounds. So we were just never catching up. So what ended up happening is that we began using funding from the World Land Trust and from FPN to actually fill in the gaps. So all these things here, 23,000, 24, 30, 47, so on, it's going up, is what is being provided by the NGOs to keep it going. And this is not sustainable. It can't keep up. So what are we trying to do about it? We thought about the different options that were open to us. So let me go down to sheep farming, which is what we looked at here. Limited stocking with merino species, managed to avoid overgrazing, but no, it's not a good option. The prices are too low, there's no way of making it sustainable, certainly not with a property this size. You might be able to if you own something 10 times or 100 times the size. Let's look at a few more. Well, internal funding, that's what we've been doing. It's not very sustainable. Research, it doesn't make money. Research, we use that to actually do conservation. Tourism, high-end tourism lodge. We thought about this very hard. We could put a lodge there and then invite people to stay, because Fundación, as I say, which is very close by, gets 120,000 visitors a year. Península Valdés gets 350,000 people. You'd think it was a logical thing. Take tourists there and, give them a good time. It's not a good idea. And the reason it's not is that we are seen as competing, we would be seen as competing with the local tourism industry. And we thought about it long and hard. And the culture doesn't allow it. I mean, we would, because FPN does a lot of, we've been fighting for protected areas on the coast, which means that we very often come up against private interests that want to develop them and turn them into big tourism sites. If we then put a lodge on the property, people would say, how come you're actually doing things that you say you shouldn't be doing elsewhere? So we decided a little bit against that. But look at the yeses here. This is the one that most seems to fit, which is doing something that the NGO can do that none of the other organizations would do, which is have school field trips and invited special guests and training, do training courses on the property. Obviously private donations would be a good one. So this is what we're heading for. To build a little thing like this, we've actually got some funding. We've got about $50,000 this year to build something that will probably look a little bit like this. This is nearby on Peninsula. This would be, which is a very cheap cinder block building with a tin roof, bunk beds where we could have about 20 or 25 people staying, and they would pay a very modest fee. And we would do training courses, school field trips, and so on. And, well, we've been through the maths, we've tried working it out, and we figure that by 2013 we might actually begin to break even. We're going to have to work hard and fast, but we feel we can actually do it. We've tried the different scenarios to see if this is going to work or not. So, and I'm going to end there, and so I'm expecting you all down there. There'll be great accommodation for you, a little rustic, but guaranteed to have a good time. So that's it. Thank you very much.
So, do we have any questions for Guillermo?
Yeah, can I? So, can I ask one thing? The training courses seem remarkable. You really think you can get that sort of income? Where are the students coming from?
We've done what FPN has. The reason FPN can survive actually is that we've had, as you know, we've run 3 big projects which have been funded by the World Bank, the GF, and UNDP, which are aimed at strengthening protected areas in the coast of Patagonia. And these are the things that really actually allow us to survive, but they're not going to carry on forever. I think we're into our last one now. And what these big projects do is they rely very strongly on training and capacity building and so on. And FPN has built up the capacity over time to do onboard fisheries observers. We've been training them, tour guides, because of this big tourist industry on the coast. We've done a lot of that. Teacher training. We've even held courses for the media, reporters, how to do environmental reporting, and a number of other things. It's tricky. Whether you can actually get people to pay for it is a question. Tour guides is possibly the most likely, where the province requires trained tour guides to accompany their groups, and therefore, if we can work it so that we will provide the tour guides with the training at a cost, to be paid. So training is one. School field trips is probably more likely in the immediate, in the short term. We're going to be targeting both, and we'll see which ones work out best. School field trips. This area is one of the areas where schools traditionally bring their sort of 14, 13-year-olds to do sort of practical field courses, and they last about 3 or 4 days, and it's fairly common, so the schools will do it, and it's very often private schools that they can afford to do it, and especially if you provide the kids with a safe environment, it's not too expensive, and that you've got sort of
So it would be a great place for that.
Yeah.
How did you get the shuttle with people here?
How did that happen? I forget how, but there is a link. Well, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. Well, I'm trust. Could be. Absolutely could be. Website, maybe. Yeah.
I just follow on from that. You're doing everything right, aren't you? I mean, you're influencing local people, the government now sort of getting a wildlife protected area together.
Mm-hmm.
Your guanaco population is starting to recover.
Mm-hmm.
You've got lots of wildlife.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why you're beating yourself up so much that you're not making money, you're not breaking even. I mean, I'm a punter here that lives in London. I support the World Land Trust, and I remember when John first raised this at a wildlife exhibition in the Mammals galleries, I remember 12 years ago, thinking, wow, this is fantastic. This is just what I want to support a wildlife group doing. And he realised, and I realise now, we must all realise that making it pay is very difficult, But what's the problem with relying on us to a degree to supply you with backup cash? I mean, why do you have to feel that you've got to break even? It's very difficult breaking even anywhere, even if you're a commercial business sometimes.
Oh, if we could do that,
you need friends,
it would actually be wonderful.
But I mean, you're doing everything right, aren't you? I mean, you're delivering on the wildlife, you're delivering on the influence. Why shouldn't we pay you to a degree to do that?
Yeah. Well, certainly, if this is a story that you convey to the person who's giving the money, and therefore they know that this is helping this sort of whole effort. That would be very good. What I don't think one should do is take resources from WLT that would be used for setting aside another protected area somewhere else.
But I think that's the thing. WLT tries to use the money to set up
new areas. Exactly.
And hope that they can make themselves self-sufficient.
Yes. However, if as a donor I'm giving money to a new protected area, or I'm trying to sustain what we're doing, those are two very good distinctions, I think. And it's a good point to make to a donor. Say, what do you want to do? Do you want to actually, set aside new areas, or do you want to make sure those areas you've got are well?
But talk to me, and I'll tell you, I want both. I want all of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can't argue that.
But my point is, why try to argue?
Yeah.
I mean, wildlife is not. I mean, it does have a commercial element to it.
Yeah.
And I would have thought you could attract more adventurous wildlife tourists.
Yeah.
Who, a lot of Twitchers pay good money to go around the world and look at stuff.
We have some WLT donors that go down regularly and spend time there and volunteer and help out and raise money here, and, which is wonderful. I mean, that is excellent, actually. And it'd be great if we could carry on. And I think if we actually had some conditions where people can stay more comfortably and so on, without making it luxurious, but just adequate, it would be one of the ways to go, certainly.
But do the Argentinian people in that area, the province of Chubut, do they know that you've got these international allies that are supplying you with hard wages and cash here? Do they not realise that this is an asset? This is something that makes Argentina an interesting place around the world.
I don't know. I don't think they realize or are aware. Certainly, tourism is targeted at the international sort of tourists. Mainly actually at the sort of the cruise ship type tourists, which is not really the one you want to target. Although, I mean, there are wonderful people who go on cruise ships, but you really want somebody who has a little sort of more solid interest in an area.
I think you might say a little bit more about that, I don't know, but I mean, conventionally as well, these big tour ships, as you said, they disgorge their cargo of people in the morning and they go away in the evening, and all the money is spent on the ship.
Yes,
they're not spending
that's
money in the local economy, and they're not supporting anyone.
Yes, or else the ship turns upside down. Yes.
And are there other people who have questions?
No, please.
Specific ones or not? Working in the spirit, trying to think what could just help with this transition to make it financially viable, short of converting wind into cash. And wind, of course, is something all the rest of Patagonia has.
Yes,
to
absolutely.
Disadvantage. Based on experience, and I can tell you a little bit more about that in private in a moment, and having visited the Mazin and Valdez Peninsula and so on, and being very familiar with Fuegian Patagonia.
Yes.
Actually, I thought the talk, I didn't read it closely, I thought it was about Wheaton Esperanza in Chile.
Oh, right.
And so the other Esperanza, but there are lots of Esperanzas in Patagonia.
Yes. Yeah.
However, to get to the point, you're not looking for a huge amount of annual income.
No, it's
actually,
not a lot of money.
you know.
No.
It really is a drop in the bucket.
Yeah.
So you need something that you need to get clever. And I'm not trying to sound as if I'm talking at you, I'm sympathetic entirely to the problem. One possibility, and I'll point to 2 or 3 things in the way that they might connect, just as an idea, is the idea of an artist in residence. Someone who could record the beauty, the intensity, something qualitatively about the experience, their experience.
Mm-hmm.
Because you've got a market
Yeah.
there of hundreds of thousands. They're floating offshore in cruise ships. Very comparatively few make the journey overland.
Yeah.
And they're coming to Patagonia for something.
Yeah.
So if you got smart and invited an artist in residence, under whatever arrangement, on the understanding that what they might produce, it could be a photographer one year,
Yeah.
it could be a landscape artist another year, it could be a botanist,
Yeah.
it could be a zoologist. You could successively invite it and get that post sponsored
Mm-hmm.
one way or another, which the general is Europe, obviously someone who would commit to something like that. Then you would need to ally that to how to market the product by arrangement with the artist.
Yeah.
Because Puerto Madryn is the main point of contact for at least the cruise traffic that's coming in.
Yeah.
And you could market postcards, note cards, so on and so forth. There's competition because everyone's trying to photograph Guanaco and
Yeah.
so on and so forth. But with some astute and good advice, you could target the outputs
Yeah.
to generate a small but growing income stream
It's an interesting idea.
that could help.
Yeah.
But a step beyond that, having come in a cruise ship, because having worked at other locations in South America from the shoreward side, in projects that just seem to be in the back of beyond, I was approached to lecture on a tour ship that, to my amazement, was targeting as a tourist destination the place that I'd begun working on 30 years before, that was the armpit of South America. It was just absolutely the last place you would ever think of taking any tourists. And talking about twitchers,
I'm intrigued.
well, you're all going to have to come. And I hope I'm not sounding too self-serving. I'm saying this is coming out of long considered deep involvement in the difficulties of trying to get takeoff point where you can create the nucleus of something that is virtually impossible, turning Calafate and Guanaco into something that will offer returns that excludes the gaucho experience, for example. A lot of people go to Patagonian estancias for the gaucho experience, and you're eliminating that. Now, you're quite right that the sheer volume of traffic, foot traffic at Punta Tambo, is highly intrusive and counterintuitive when you're trying to manage a nature reserve.
Yeah.
But it's inevitable if you're going to awaken the awareness of the next generation, to take them and show them, not to chase elephant seals across the beach.
Yeah.
I hope one of them got a boot up the backside.
There's that bunch, yeah.
Yeah, but it's the sheer volume of traffic. You don't want to reassign that to Esperanza.
No.
You don't want hundreds of thousands. You don't want tens of thousands.
Selective.
But you might try an experiment to trial something. For example, if I was going back to Puerto Madryn and I was lecturing on the vessel that I was, and you and I got talking and we could plan it several years ahead, I am quite certain in talking with the people who run it, and this isn't the the cost of whatever it is that when
No,
not the one with 3,000 or 4,000 people, but you've got the whole spectrum in cruising, and you've got a highly educated, highly motivated, wealthy clientele that beyond all other motives for traveling, a nucleus of them are intensely interested to connect with two things, what I call culture and ecology. If you can wed those two things together, you've got the nucleus of something very interesting. Now, you mentioned archaeology, for example, and there will be archaeological sites there, but you felt uncomfortable almost because you hesitated in describing what happened to Wiltshire, both the southern Ionic King and the northern Ionic King. There is an extraordinary and compelling story there. And that story is accessible. It can be told through what archaeologists can read into the human use of the landscape in the past. And it can connect with what you've got on the ground there. And that sense of discovery for people, that landscapes contain histories that can be revealed, is an extraordinarily powerful, educative, and inspiring tool. Now, what you might consider is identifying the range of cruise ships that are coming by, and identify one that might have that upper level clientele, or 3 or 4. There's bound to be at least half a dozen of them. And initiate contact with them, and invite them to make a qualitatively different kind of visit as an offer, as part of their offer, because they offer to people to go up the Chubut Valley. Some people come overland. They go to Tremouth. They're fascinated by the
Welsh community there.
The Welsh community, Llaman, and so on and so forth. The extraordinary discoveries, fossil discoveries that have been made. And you're talking about that. All of that's actually within your remit there. And I think if you proposed that and prepared a package to 1 or 2 of these cruise lines, a selection of them, trial with them, and said, would 100 of your passengers on a given day, if they were given advance information and know what they're supporting, come and be prepared to add an additional levy of $100, because it's a conscious decision to support something that needs support. If this kind of talk could be given on board as an invited talk.
It sounds as though I should get the name from you of a couple of tour ships and companies, because you probably work with them, is that right?
Not as an end in itself, but as a means to an end.
All right.
So that if you were invited to give a talk and explained this, that one slide saying, you love squid, that's where it's coming from offshore. You heat your home, that's what's coming. So you don't want to get too rhetorical or polemical about it, but you can make it a truly illuminating, no pun intended in this case, a process that I'm sure there would be a response to. And then you could moderate that, have some control over the tourist traffic, because a lot of the big cruise companies say we can't afford it, the schedule doesn't allow it, doesn't offer commercial returns, but there is a voluntary aspect to it. Some people may say, well, 10% of a given body of people coming offshore, if they could be suitably prepared so that they know what they're coming to and why. And that personal contact can be very important. And that combined with the artisan residence, if you think about putting these ideas together, might enable you, because to attain what you need to in the sort of medium term, 5 years down the line. Forgive the indulgence.
That's good ideas. Certainly we'll try and follow them up, I think. Certainly has to.
The particular park, since the gentleman asked, was Parque Nacional Magellanic, on the coast of Ecuador. It was the most recently created of the Ecuadorian national parks. And the port of call was Manta, and the company did its on-the-ground research and decided that it was an extraordinary day trip visit to make to a small community in the heart of the national park. And the personal connection with that and the story behind it made it the highlight. It absolutely made a difference because people could then begin really to connect with, which is the difficulty with all cruise operations and the port visits within the radius that they make. But if there's the germs of an idea, seeds of an idea to really turn a disadvantage into something that can work.
I've got a query which is more ecological, I suppose. You said that the Guanaco population was now reaching something that we thought might be the limit.
What does one do?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a tricky question, that one. And we've seen in some areas, some protected areas that are too small, populations of guanacos that just grow and grow and grow, and then you get a bad year where there's a bad drought and the population just collapses because there's just no food. And, well, it happens. I mean, whether one intervenes and actually sort of tries to keep the number down or not is a question.
Is the Guanaco used?
It is, and it's being used. They're trying different things now for using the wool. The Guanaco hair, the fiber is actually very fine. It's something like 17 microns or something, so it's finer than sheep. Sheep is a good sheep wool is under 20. So it's very valuable actually. It costs goes for about as much as 200 pounds a kilo.
But I guess you're getting far fewer kilos.
You get about half a kilo of guanaco. And then the other thing is managing it. Managing guanacos to shear them is not easy at all. I mean, they're wild animals, and it's exciting. And the other thing is they suffer from what's called it's a myopathy. If you actually restrain guanacos in an area where they can't get out, they'll suddenly, just for no reason, die. The stress on the heart is just so great. So they're not like sheep. They don't all herd nicely. They run like crazy. They jump like crazy, and very difficult. And they spit, of course, and bite. But yes, it's being tried.
Is there any market for their meat?
There is, in some areas. I think in Punta Arenas,
There's a high end value for you.
Yeah.
Organically produced free-range guano.
You could, yeah, absolutely.
From our surplus stock.
That's right. You bet. Can be done.
But, so you are happy? I mean, you're happy with that idea?
You mean actually using guanaco for meat?
Yeah, or
I think one has to be open to different options. I mean, if the guanaco are going to die anyway because there's an overpopulation, you've got to figure out some system of managing them. It's something one doesn't like to do. Guanacos are shot everywhere because they compete with sheep. Well, if you sort of manage these populations in some way, it may work.
What's happening to the female population?
On the property or in general?
On the property specifically, but that's too small for
Yeah.
a range.
The populations they're growing. Pumas do very well, and if they're not, I mean, they used to be kept down just by sheer hunting pressure, but now with a lot of people actually removing sheep off their property because it's not worth their while, and the populations are coming back up.
And are they not controlling the guanaco?
They aren't on the property because surrounding the property there are estancias that have puma and guanaco, but they're keeping the puma population down.
I could, another was sort of where I was driving at a bit as well. You know, you've got neighbouring properties that hunt. Is that they have paid hunters or just the people?
Both. Yeah.
And how does that fit within your vision of conservation?
Well, it's a buffer zone for Peninsula Lis. In theory, there should be sort of limits, restrictions on hunting, and it should be sort of managed in some way where you can actually guarantee a sort of sustainable level of the herbivores, the natural indigenous guanacos on Peninsula Lis, and even puma. But I mean, we're a long way from that. I think people are still just thinking, how can I get rid of everything that isn't cheap and try and get as much out of it as I can. So, okay.
Just, what's the armadillo?
That's an armadillo. Yeah.
Are they on
That's actually it's actually a small one. Yes, you're right. They're very common around the houses there. They're clean-up people.
Okay, well,
Okay,
Guillermo, thank you very much for coming and spending the time this night. I know you've got to get off to another meeting, but if there's a few minutes afterwards, anybody would like to have a private chat with Guillermo or Graham,
Yeah,
then I'm sure you'll have to do so. So thank you very much.
thank you.